Welcome to the Backlash at Backlash.com. My name is Rod Van Mecklin, and in this video I'm going to read from my 1991 article, Affirmative Action. 1991, Bellevue, Washington. If we intend affirmative action to redress present social inequities and defend against discrimination, then we need to extend these protections to men. That includes sexual parity. As most know, women sexually discriminate against men. Commonly, men are the ones who have to stick out their necks and do all the asking. They ask for the dates and risk being rejected, make the first moves and risk being accused of sexual harassment, initiate sex and risk being accused of date rape. It's time, therefore, for women to share these burdens. Until affirmative action guarantees sexual parity for men, as, for example, by requiring women to date nerds, wonks, geeks, and other men who are victims of discrimination in the single scene, and do 50% of the asking, the government is encouraging sex discrimination. That there are no such guarantees have yet been forthcoming is clear evidence affirmative action discriminates against men. Now, for the humor impaired, that was intended as a joke. But there are people who, over the years, have read that and have accused me of being serious about that. Geez, people, get a life. Quoting from Daniel E. Van Weiss in The Great Divide, affirmative action discriminates against men and creates an us versus them mentality by awarding preference to workers and students according to their gender. Understandably, this causes many men to see women as educational and economic enemies. That women are not likely to remain on a job as long as men makes matters worse by highlighting just how little most women seem to value the advantages affirmative action affords them. That was from The Great Divide by Daniel Van Weiss. So those who may take exception to my stand on affirmative action will know I do not speak of this as some self-serving white man. I will mention, as I've mentioned before, that while both of my grandfathers immigrated from Europe, both of my grandmothers were American Indians. I'm a member of the Cowlitz Indian tribe. I served on the tribe's tribal council for 10 years and several boards and committees, and still publish a tribal members newsletter. So this is not, I'm not coming at this from the perspective of a white guy who's complaining because he's getting shortchanged. No. As a legal minority, I have available to me all the opportunities which affirmative action might afford and choose to exercise none of them because justice is not served by injustice. Quoting from Edward Koch, former mayor of New York City, in an article for the Wall Street Journal in 1991, affirmative action is not supposed to supply advantages, but provide the means whereby minorities can be mainstreamed into higher education and the workplace. But affirmative action goals too often take priority over fairness. That was Edward Koch. Quotas are not a good idea because they impose unfair restrictions based on non-job relevant characteristics. They cause justifiable resentment. Inevitably, that will lead to the backlash feminists rightly fear. Instead of preventing discrimination, affirmative action is promoting it. When a solution causes more problems than it fixes, it's time to find a new one. Is there a better solution? Well, maybe it's time to go back to school and find out. Education and discrimination. One of the most discriminatory environments in modern American society is the public school system. Dominated by women and the female ideology, with its emphasis on sitting still, being quiet, and other feminine behaviors, it stifles male abilities and, therefore, indiscriminately restricts boys' opportunities. If our goal really is to prevent discrimination in our society, then it needs to start in the public school system, and that means sexual segregation in the lower grades when boys are at a developmental disadvantage to girls and suffer by being forced too young into coeducational classrooms. Quoting now from George Gilder's book, Men and Marriage, the problem begins in the first grade when many of the boys are a full 9 months behind girls in digital coordination, and the emphasis is on penmanship. Now, yes, George Gilder is a traditionalist. He's a far-right conservative. But even non-traditionalists like myself, libertarian types who think that traditionalism is, well, I think it's okay if that's your choice, but I'm personally looking for more of a John Galt, Dagny Taggart kind of a relationship, which is a gift relationship, not where you go to hug each other and to witness the history of another person's life and have somebody else witness the history of your life, or to give comfort and all that sort of stuff. I want a mate that I can share the excitement and the wonder and the joy of a discovery and of development and of work and of accomplishment with. That's not really all that traditional. I mean, it's still boy-girl, but regardless, George Gilder's book, Men and Marriage, is wonderful, and I strongly encourage you to go check it out. I don't think it's for sale anymore, but you can probably find it in a library or maybe online, and it has a lot of wisdom and insight in it, and he is a devout anti-feminist and just absolutely slaughters some of their assertions. Enough about George. The pattern continues, but the dynamic discrimination reverses. Despite that the overwhelming number of public school, elementary, and high school teachers are women, the 17 magazine mentality deters girls from science and math. Thus, according to the 1991 report from the female supremacist organization, the American Association of University Women, which is about as sexist and bigoted as you can imagine, quote, "The educational system is not meeting girls' needs," close quote. The fundamental goal of our present public education system is conformity to the status quo. That was Betty Friedan pointing that out in the book The Feminine Mystique. A curriculum of conformity is the problem, as, in many ways, our public schools teach our children to cherish conformity, pedagogues preaching the sacred stereotypes by means both subtle and gross. From hate male behavior modifications, which force energetic and object-oriented boys to sit quietly and listening to boring stories about domestic life, to subtle withholding of recognition and rewards, which divert girls away from participation in math and science, they claimed that public education still follows the agenda of the 1950s functionalists. Quote from Betty Friedan. Functionalists did not wholly accept the Freudian argument that anatomy is destiny, but they accepted wholeheartedly an equally restrictive definition of woman. Woman is what society says she is. That was from The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. Their agenda called for molding each of us into the kinds of cogs needed by corporate America to fit our necessary function by converting the hopes and dreams of our childhood into the wants and needs necessary to sustain the status quo. 2012, Olympia, Washington. When I wrote the passages above in 1992, they were still true. Since then, however, public education has done much to remedy the shortcomings for girls, while things have grown even worse for boys. Public education is now dominated by a feminist agenda, which uses functional empiricism to destroy masculinity and promote the feminist supremacist agenda. I do not intend this to be an attack upon the teachers, but upon a system that systematically stifles its students' passionate delight in life. Our hopes and dreams are the fires and the engines of our lives. By them we aspire to impossible heights of existence and glory. We delight in them. They give our lives meaning, and we live for their fulfillment. But the life ruled and defined by functional empiricism, deprived of the chance to reach for the stars like a child chasing after an impossibly beautiful butterfly, has no meaning, only machine-like purpose. A purpose affirmative action is supposed to oppose. Discrimination prevails at the most fundamental level of our society, in our public school system. Until we resolve this, all the affirmative action programs in the world won't fix anything.